What do you do if you're about to shoot a short film for the first time in your life as a cinematographer? Englebørb was my first one, and I wish I knew a few more things about shooting a film. But I made good friends, learned a lot, and ended up shooting many other short movies. I do like influencers. Imagine being called by a director who asks you to be a photograph on set. Basically, photographer in English. That's the word for cinematographer in Danish. Another term is director of photography, the person who's directing the photography of a film, responsible for camera, lights, and basically the whole mood of a visual production. But the first time I was asked to be a photograph for a short film, I thought I was gonna be a photographer on set. I was cool with that, but then I realized I was going to be the cinematographer. You know, I was used to English sets, and that was the first time for me on a full Danish set. Englebørb, Angel Child, a short film by Jules Bostrup. In a second, I was on board for a short movie about grief and a family of different backgrounds and moods, and about how people simply behave differently in situations where they're not used to be. This episode is less about the whole production and more about what we did to achieve some specific looks, and also about how I learned to be more involved in pre-production, because it's essential to achieve a good result. First, I had to read the script in Danish. My Danish is okay. I understand a lot, I can handle conversations, technical stuff are hard, dialects are nearly impossible. But reading is another matter, and much easier. After that, Jules and I had a couple of meetings and then created a mood board and moved to a more detailed shot list. She had in mind a few things, and the process was really smooth. On the contrary, I had a lot on my table, and I think I could and should have done more. This is a process that I learned with time. Most of the short films are not paid, and they require a lot of time. Time that I have now, but I did not have in 2023. Well, moving forward, I got introduced to the producer, Elvira. In my department, I had Kespa as first AC, like for the Macallan commercial. What's a first AC? They are assistant camera, primarily responsible for pulling focus, but also for prepping camera, both in pre-production and on set, testing all the equipment before the shoot. Under the first AC, there is a second AC, who's essentially assisting the first, helping to swap lenses or camera parts, keeping batteries charged. Then, for lighting, a gaffer I never worked with, called Nikolai. Eventually, we became friends, and I had him on a couple of other productions, but at some point he decided to sail across the Atlantic, and he's been out there for a while. He definitely deserves a lot of credits for some really good lighting we did together. Also because he brought a lot of experience to fix a car set I will describe later. Well, before jumping on set, let's have a look at what we had for this production. It's important to say that I involved NG Media, and we could use a few things we had in-house, like C-stands, some flags, sandbags, and a few lights. And Finn, our intern at the time, who jumped on this production as second assistant director. As usual, we had my Zcam E2F6 as main cam, and we rented a few things from Simple Rent. To give you a better overview, the total amount spent, excluding NG Media's help, was around 3,700 Danish crowns, which is a bit more than 500 euros. I had 130 euros less in the budget, so I decided to chip in, helping with some extra money. Let's start having a look at this first setup. The room was fairly small. First, we had to block all the natural light because we just wanted to rely on a dark, moody room. Then Nikolai proceeded creating a soft light using one of the most popular techniques called book light. By definition, this setup resembles an open book. The technique creates a soft light by combining bounce and diffusion. Light is bounced off a reflective surface like muslin, a reflector, poly, and then passed through some sort of diffusion like silk or a Greek cloth to create a nice and natural wrap around the subject. This is achieved because the double modification spreads the light, making it softer, controlled, and reduce the shadows. We had a second light in the back to help us achieving a bit of 3D pop, and then we played with practicals to justify the different light sources. The main problem was the space, and the fact that I had to move around with the camera, so I always had to keep in mind where I was compared to the light source to avoid underside shadows. We now move to two outdoor scenes, both fairly complicated due to the weather condition. It wasn't raining, but it was cold and extremely windy. But let's start with this car scene. Go. All good so far? So nice. Let's start with the car scene from the wide angle. The main issue while using cars is reflection. Together with Nikolai, we created a system of flags to block some lights from spilling all over and avoid unwanted reflections. We were in an outdoor scenario, so controlling sun, clouds, and shadows on a budget is not the easiest task. We managed to create a solid, but at the same time very fragile setup, but it worked. Then we had to find a way to power our main light sources, and we simply asked someone around. Denmark is just the perfect country for that. We literally knocked at someone's and they allowed us to use the electricity. For this particular reverse shot, we kept the same setup, adding a net open flag. Being blurred in the background, it was not visible. What a net flag does is lowering the output of the light, basically controlling the intensity. And when you have to fight against the biggest light source, the sun, these tools become mandatory and really helpful. For this close-up, which is one of my favorite frames of the short film, we moved some of the outdoor lights and used a black flag inside the car to create negative fill. A black flag is one of our main friends. They can be used for different purposes, even for something called courtesy, which is basically blocking the sun while a camera operator or a cinematographer are operating, so they can look at the monitor, or simply don't be hit by the sun. It can also be used to block a light source, or to direct the light to a specific direction, which is basically one of the main use. In this case, we use it to create a darker area on the talent's face, because the role of the flag was to absorb the light, reducing it, and then bouncing it back to a subject. But why do we want to do this? Well, the technique helps shaping the subject, allowing more contrast to be in the picture with a more three-dimensional look. The last set I want to show you is the beach. Very beachy.
Yeah.
Beach. The last set I want to show you is the beach. First of all, reaching that place was fairly complicated because we had to bring the equipment all the way down to some steep stairs. Then two things we generally hate: sand and wind. In this scenario, we had to use again the scrim, but the wind was so strong that we literally had people holding it. For the close-ups, we used some poly to bounce light, and again neck flag to create more contrast. Let's jump into post-production. This time I had nothing to do with the editing, but I took care of color grading. I already had in mind the look and feel of this film thanks to a really good job made with Jules in pre-production. For the interior shots, we went for a not too intense look, even though I might have crushed a bit the shadows looking at it a few years later, especially in the scene that we analyzed. We decided to keep a very neutral skin tone look, and in general we didn't go for anything too aggressive, leaving a very natural and balanced look. For the car scene, I had to create a couple of masks because I could see one of the floppies. This is one of those things that maybe 99% of the viewers would not even notice, but I couldn't just stand with it. Oh, and one little annoying thing happened with the beach scene. Due to an editing choice, gladly I was asked before doing that and I proved it, 2 different takes were used for the same scene. Unfortunately, the sun was changing rapidly and clouds were present, creating a huge shift of light between each take. To my eyes, that is actually pretty visible. But we decided to give priority to the acting and the dialogue delivery rather than to the consistency of the light. Choices like that are visible at every stage of movies. By watching carefully, even massive productions, it's easy to notice how sometimes cuts are not precise, maybe because of the actor's posture that is different from a take to another, or to a hand movement, but we have to make choices, and most of the time, acting will have the priority over anything else. The brief. What? This is still called the brief and not it's a wrap. Nice. Another intense production. Limited budget, limited time, but a decently sized crew helped this film to run just great. Something I'd change if I could go back in time is definitely the amount of time I put into pre-production. As I said, being in the position I am at the moment will certainly allows me to do that. And I would have made some different choices in terms of lighting style as well. But everything is an experience, and my best recommendation is to just go out there and shoot. Literally, ask your local restaurant if they need content, tell your musician friend to shoot a music video, ask your school if you could make fun promotion content for them. The important thing is just to try things out. Just be brave and shoot. I'd like to finish with a little note about outdoor shooting. Indoor, things are somehow easier. There's electricity, it's generally warm, and most of the time, weather conditions do not really make a difference, unless relying uniquely on natural lighting also for indoor. But outdoor, many things are unpredictable. Things can go way worse than just a little bit of wind. I just want to recommend having a sort of headquarters, talk with a local cafe, make an agreement. Maybe you can buy them lunch or breakfast for the crew, or maybe ask a local cinema if you can use one of their rooms to store camera equipment, clothes, makeup. Be creative, and especially don't be shy. People are willing to help if you ask. There's shitty people out there, sure, but I can promise that you can find a lot of good souls even in the darkest of times, if only remembers to turn on the light. per aspera ad astra. That was Dumbledore. Yes, I know.
You have to
Wrote
include
that.
Dumbledore being there.